The ship sails off into the horizon without looking back, and he stands knee-deep in the surf, his hands tied behind his back at the edge of the world. A foreign body, foreign calluses on his palms. The last thing he remembers. The crack of rock overhead and the roar of the collapse in the mine. And now this black sand and a single thought. Survive for 72 hours or die. Daniel Kahn was cast onto an island in the middle of a dead zone of reefs, a place where ships do not go, a place from which no one returns. The Senate called it a gentle execution without an executioner, a clear conscience. But the Senate didn't know one thing. This man had already died once underground and had no intention of doing it again. He turns his back to the sea, and his brain kicks in before the fear. Don't think about what happened. Think about what to do in the next 10 minutes. This habit saved him on every shift off Seattle. The knot on his wrists is nautical but simple. He staggers toward the rocks in the tidal zone. They're covered in shells as sharp as razors. He presses his back against them. He rubs the rope against the edge of a shell. 30 strokes. 50. 70. Something warm is flowing down his wrists. Blood. It doesn't matter. The rope snaps. Now he looks at the island not as a victim, like an engineer at a construction site. Black volcanic sand means basalt rock, which means there will be caves. Seaweed on the rocks up to 3 meters high means this is the high tide line, and everything below will be flooded. Coniferous trees mean a temperate climate, and winter will be worse. He calculates. Water, shelter, warmth. 3 tasks. 72 hours. If he doesn't find fresh water in 3 days, he'll die. If he doesn't find shelter by nightfall, he'll freeze to death. If he doesn't get a fire by tomorrow, he won't be able to disinfect his wounds. He doesn't cry. He doesn't pray. He counts his steps to the nearest cliff. On the northern slope, he finds a crack in the rock. It's dry. It smells of stone, not rot. A good sign. The cavity extends 3 meters deep, 10 meters above high tide. A hole in the rock, but it will suffice for the night. Now for water. He walks along the cliffs and finds a crevice with a puddle at the bottom. He tastes it. Salty. Almost seawater. A local would lie down nearby and wait to die. But Daniel looks at the black streaks above the level of the puddle and sees what the local doesn't. Water evaporates here every day. If he catches the vapor before it drips back down, he'll have fresh water. High school chemistry, 7th grade, a solar still. He tears off an armful of broad, waxy leaves from the coastal bushes. He finds a deep shell the size of 2 palms. He digs a hole with his hands by the puddle. He lines it with leaves. He places the shell in the center. He pours the salty water around it, but not inside. He stretches a leaf over the top. He places a small stone as a weight in the center. The leaf sags in a cone shape directly over the shell. The sun will heat the water. The vapor will condense on the leaf. Drops will run down to the weight and drip into the shell. Clean water. Maybe half a cup by morning. But half a cup is the difference between life and death. An hour until dark. He drags dry seaweed and pine needles into the crevice, curls up on the hard bedding. His shirt is still damp. He's shivering, his teeth. He closes his eyes and counts, not out of fear, out of habit. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the sea crashes against the rocks like distant explosions in a quarry. No food, no tools, with cut wrists. And he isn't thinking about how bad he feels. He's thinking that in the morning, he needs to check the still, find flint, explore the caves, set a crab trap. He has a plan for 72 hours, and that's enough to keep him from going mad. He wakes up from the cold. His body aches as if he'd been beaten. His wrists are red and swollen, but without pus, for now. He crawls toward the still, lifts the lid. Water glistens at the bottom of the basin. He sniffs it. No salt. He lifts it with both hands. 1/3 of a cup. The first sip. Warm and tasteless. The best water of his life. He forces himself to stop. He starts the cycle over. He looks at the empty horizon, not a sail, not a bird. He is completely alone, and he smiles. Yesterday he was alone and dying. Today he is alone and drinking water. School curriculum, 7th grade, and that was enough to keep him from dying. He spends the second day building a fire. No fire, no heat. No heat, no life. A dry pine stick, a flat piece of hardwood with a hollow, a groove for embers, moss for kindling. He clamps the stick between his palms and twists it. 5 minutes later, his calluses burst. No smoke. Second attempt. Nothing. A third wisp of smoke, and it goes out. He is silent, staring at his raw palms. Then he stands up and looks for other material. A drier stick, a sturdier base. He wraps his bleeding palms in strips of fabric from his shirt. He twists for so long that he loses track of time. Thick brown smoke billows out. He doesn't stop. A tiny orange ember flares up in the groove. Alive. He pushes it onto the moss. He leans in. He blows softly, and just as his father taught him by the grill in the backyard in Seattle. The moss flares up. A yellow flame. Wood shavings. Twigs. Thicker. The flame rises. He takes a sharp stone and scratches the wall. I'll never let the fire go out again. By evening, he catches his first meal. Crabs under the rocks in the tidal zone. Every other one manages to pinch his finger. 6 of them. He roasts them in the coals. The meat is tough and salty. The best meal of his life. 2 days. Water, fire, shelter, food. All 4 bases covered. He folds his fingers and runs through the plan aloud, as if at a pre-shift briefing. His voice is hoarse in the empty crevice, but it's his voice, and he's alive. The 3rd day begins with a discovery. He climbs the northern slope and finds not a crack, a cave. An oval entrance 1.5 meters high. Inside, it's dry and quiet. Basalt. He goes 5 meters 10 deep. The ceiling rises. He stands up to his full height. The air is cool, about 12 degrees, constant. He knows this from the mines. Deeper than 10 meters, the temperature doesn't change, neither in winter nor in summer. So here, he doesn't have to survive. He can live. The cave branches off. The left passage draws in moisture. The right one, dry warmth. Natural ventilation. The difference in elevation creates a draft. He stands at the fork and smiles. Because he didn't find a cave. He found a foundation. There will be a home here. He moved into the cave on the 4th day. He dragged the coals from the crevice in the half shell of a large conch. He carried them carefully, like a surgeon carries a heart. The coals were his life. To lose the fire meant tearing his palms to the bone again on spindle. He built a new hearth against the wall of the main chamber. This time, he did it right. He arranged the stones in a semicircle. Behind them, against the wall, he left a gap a palm's width wide. Hot air would rise up the wall and escape through a natural crack above his head. The flow of fresh air from the lower passage would provide oxygen. He lit the fire. The smoke rose, evenly, cleanly. Every stone on the chamber wall was visible. He sat on the floor and watched the flames. His first engineering triumph. A hearth with a vent through a natural crack. A trifle. Nonsense. But he knew that it was precisely these trifles that made the difference between those who live and those who die. The draft worked. The smoke went away. The air in the chamber remained clean. He could breathe. He could sleep. He could think. He spent the first week securing the entrance. The cave was fine, but the entrance faced directly northeast. That was where the prevailing wind blew from. In bad weather, it would blow right up to the hearth. He needed a vestibule. He began hauling stones, flat ones, heavy ones, basalt slabs that had broken away from the rock along natural cracks. Each weighed between 10 and 30 kilograms. He could lift 30, with difficulty. 40 was out of the question. He carried them one at a time, up the slope, through a narrow passage, to the cave entrance. 10 trips a day, then 15. His arms got used to it. His back didn't. By the end of the first week, he had a wall waist high in front of the entrance, with a bend. The wind hit the wall and blew past. It got a few degrees warmer inside. He knew this not from a thermometer, from his breath. When you exhale and don't see steam, it means the temperature is above 10. Inside, he didn't see any steam. Outside, he did. So it's working. At the same time, he was mapping the island. Every morning for 2 hours, he walked around a new section. He counted his steps. He memorized landmarks. In the evening, he drew a sketch on a flat rock. The map turned out rough but accurate. The island was shaped like an irregular oval stretching from southwest to northeast. The southern shore, a black sand beach. A gentle slope into the water, but reefs beyond. The western shore, cliffs. The rocks drop vertically into the sea. Access is impossible. North shore, its caves, a rocky slope, a small cove cluttered with rocks. East shore, the most interesting. Here the rocks formed a semi-enclosed grotto. The sea flowed in through a narrow passage between two stone walls. Inside, the water was calmer. He noticed this during a lull. A potential harbor. He made a mental note. In the center of the island, forest, coniferous, dense. Undergrowth of those very bushes with broad leaves. The soil is thin on the rock, but it's there. He found 2 freshwater springs, both on the eastern slope. The first, a thin trickle of water from a crack in the rock, cold, clear. The flow was small but steady. The second, a seasonal stream in a ravine. It was flowing now, but traces on the rocks showed that it dried up in the summer. The first spring was more important. He marked its coordinates on his map and circled them 3 times with charcoal. On the 9th day, he made his first tools. Stone was everywhere. But not every stone is suitable for working with. He needed flint or obsidian, something that splits into sharp flakes. Basalt wasn't suitable for this, too grainy. But on the southern beach, among the pebbles, he found several pieces of something resembling flint. Dark, smooth. It split with a sharp edge. He sat on the beach and spent 3 hours striking stone against stone. He chipped off flakes. Most were useless, but 4 turned out well. 2 scrapers, 1 knife, 1 chopping tool. Rough, uneven, but sharp. He could cut skin with them, whittle wood, chop off branches. It changed everything. With his bare hands, he was an animal. With a tool, he was a man. Then he remembered the shackles. When they had set him ashore, his hands had been bound with rope, but on his ankles were marks from something metal. Iron rings. They'd been removed before he was set ashore, removed and thrown into the water. He'd seen them glint. But 1 ring had been broken, and a fragment remained. A small, curved piece of iron, about a finger's length. He found it on the first day on the beach while looking for shells for the still. He put it in his mouth so he wouldn't lose it. Then he forgot about it. Now he remembered. Iron. Real iron. In a world where he had nothing, this scrap was worth more than gold. He took it out, examined it. Soft iron, malleable. He could flatten it on a rock, sharpen it. He spent the whole day at it. He pounded the scrap with a flat stone on a stone anvil, slowly, carefully. The metal yielded. It flattened out. It stretched. He sharpened 1 edge against a smooth stone. By evening, he had a blade. Small, crooked, but made of iron. It cut through wood 5 times easier than a stone knife. He held it in his palm and looked at it. There it was, the beginning. With this blade, he could do things that were impossible without it. Cut grooves, plane boards, sharpen stakes. He put the blade away in a stone niche by the hearth and went to sleep. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The second week was devoted to traps and supplies. He wove 3 crab traps from flexible twigs. The design was simple, a cone of twigs with a narrow entrance and a wide chamber. The crab crawls inside for the bait and can't find its way out. He set them up in the tidal zone among the rocks. He checked them every morning. Nothing on the first day. 1 crab on the second. On the third day, 4. He began drying the meat on the rocks by the hearth. Tough and salty, but full of calories. Then he found bird nests on the western cliffs. Seabirds, large, gray. They nested on the ledges. The eggs were as big as a fist. He took 2 from each nest, never all of them. The source must remain. He knew this from engineering. Don't deplete a resource to the bottom. Leave room for recovery. He boiled the eggs in a shell pot. He placed the shell on the rocks over the coals. The water boiled slowly, but it boiled. A boiled egg with dried crab and a handful of edible roots he'd found in the forest. That was his daily ration. Meager, but enough to work. By the end of the second week, he'd finished the vestibule. The cave entrance now looked like a short corridor with 2 turns. The wind didn't penetrate inside, even during a storm. He'd tested it on a stormy day. Outside, the bent so hard that the trees bent. Inside, the fire in the hearth didn't even flicker. He stood in the vestibule, listening to the wind howling behind the wall, and smiled. It was his first real home in this world. A hole in the rock with a stone entrance hall, but a home. The third week, he began to systematically explore the cave system. He made a torch, a stick wrapped in dry moss and soaked in crab fat. It burned for about 20 minutes. He lit the torch and went deeper. The left passage, the one that went down and reeked of dampness. He walked 30 meters down it. The ceiling dropped. The walls narrowed, then widened again. He emerged into a chamber the size of a large room. The ceiling was 3 meters high. The walls were smooth. There was a puddle on the floor. Condensation. Somewhere above, water was seeping through the rock and dripping. Steadily. Once every 3 seconds. He held out his palm. Fresh, clean, cold. He laughed. The sound bounced off the walls and came back to him like a stranger's voice. An underground spring. A steady one. This solved the water problem for good. No more waiting by the distiller for a single drop. No more walking a kilometer to the stream. The water was here, right under his house. He placed a large basin under the drip and went outside. By morning, the basin was full. He poured the water into a hollowed-out recess in the rock. The first reservoir. Primitive, but functional. The right passage turned out to be longer. It ascended and branched off twice. One of the side passages led to the surface, a second exit, concealed by bushes. It led to the eastern slope. That was important. 2 exits meant 2 escape routes, an engineer's habit. Always 2 exits from any room. He checked the draft. He lit a torch at the lower entrance and walked to the upper one. The torch flame tilted. The draft went from bottom to top. The elevation difference was working. This meant that ventilation could be set up in any room between these 2 points. Inflow from below, exhaust from above. The simplest principle. It worked in mines, in subway tunnels, and it worked here, in a cave on an unknown island. The 4th week. The first month was coming to an end. He marked the days with notches on the wall by the entrance. 28 notches. 4 weeks. He is alive. He is full. He has water and fire and a roof over his head and tools. He had completed the task of the first 72 hours. Then the task of the first week. Then the task of the first month. Now he needed a task for the next month. He sat by the hearth in the evening and began to think. He spoke aloud. A habit. In the tunnel under Seattle, he always used to say his plan out loud. It helped him not to miss any details. So, Khan, what do you have? A cave? 2 levels. The lower one is wet with water. The upper one is dry with 2 exits. A hearth with ventilation. 3 days worth of food, tools, stone, and iron. What do you need? Expand the living space. Set up a permanent water storage system. Make a proper place to sleep. Start work on a storage room for winter supplies. And most importantly, start chiseling a tunnel. He fell silent. He looked at the wall in front of him. Basalt, dark, dense, hard. Chiseling it by hand with a stone tool. That's not days. That's weeks. Months. But he knew something the local stonecutters didn't. He knew that basalt was fissured, that it had lines of weakness, natural planes along which the rock splits more easily. He knew how to find them, by sound. Strike the wall with a stone and listen. A dull sound. A monolith. Don't touch it. A ringing sound, a crack nearby. Strike here. He stood up and began tapping the walls. Tap, tap, tap. Dull, dull, ringing. He marked the spot with charcoal. He moved on. Tap, tap, ringing. Another mark. An hour later, he knew where the walls were weaker. Tomorrow, he would begin. He began chiseling the tunnel on the 30th day. It was the hardest work he had ever done in his life. Harder than anything in Seattle. There, he had jackhammers and a concrete breaker and a crew of 12. Here, he had his hands and a stone chisel and an iron blade. He struck the rock along the lines of the cracks, chipping off pieces, small ones, about the size of a fist, sometimes 2 fists. He pulled them out, strike again. On the first day, he'd made 20 centimeters, 30. He looked at the wall and at his hands and did the math in his head. 12 meters. That's how far he needed to go. At this rate, it would take more than a month. Every day, no days off, no breaks except for eating and sleeping. He closed his eyes and sighed. Then he opened them and struck again. The tunnel was devouring him. Every day the same thing. Up before dawn, checking the traps, food, water, then into the tunnel. He pounded the wall with a pickaxe until the rock crushed his fingers through the cloth wrapping. Then he switched hands, then switched again. He shoveled the debris into a leather bag sewn from scraps of his shirt and the hide of some small animal he'd found dead on the shore. He hauled the bag out. He dumped the rock into a pile on the slope. He returned. He struck again. By the end of the 5th week, he had dug 1.5 meters. His hands were swollen. His nails were cracked. His right shoulder ached so badly he couldn't lift his arm above his head. Every morning he woke up and for the first 10 seconds couldn't make a fist. Then he'd stretch it out. Then he'd go to work. He talked to the rock, out loud. "Come on, girl. You're going to go this way for me. I know you. I saw your sisters near Seattle. You're a cracked beauty, and you'll do what I say." The sound of his voice bounced off the walls and came back as an echo. He was alone, completely alone. And he talked to the stone because if he stopped talking, he'd stop. And if he stopped, he'd sit down. And if he sat down, he'd lie down. And if he lay down, he wouldn't get up. In the 6th week, he figured out how to speed up the work. Fire. An old method, as ancient as the world. He built a fire at the face. He heated the wall to such an extent that the rock became red hot. Then he splashed cold water on it. Thermal shock. The rock cracked. Not deeply, but cracks appeared where there had been none. He drove wooden wedges into the cracks. He poured water over the wedges. The wood swelled. The pressure widened the cracks. He inserted a pickaxe and struck. A chunk of rock the size of a head broke off and fell at his feet. He stood and looked at it. In a single operation, he had accomplished more than in 3 days of manual labor. The thermal method. The Romans had used it too, and it worked. The smoke in the tunnel was a problem, but the ventilation managed it if he built the fire slowly and kept the entrance open. He began alternating, a day of manual labor, a day of thermal work. The pace doubled, then tripled. But there was another problem: temptation. Every evening when he sat by the hearth and counted the centimeters he'd covered, a voice in his head spoke to him. Simplify. Make the arch lower. Don't put up supports. Don't waste time on drainage. What drainage? Drainage? It's dry here. Why the triple safety margin? There are no inspections here, no bosses, no checks. Who's going to find out? And every evening he answered that voice the same way. That guy near Seattle thought he could simplify things too. That guy didn't sign off on the report for reinforcing the side tunnel. And the ceiling came crashing down on his head. No. Triple safety margin. Always. He designed the tunnel as if people were going to walk through it, even though he would be the only one walking through it. The floor slopes 2 degrees from the face to the exit to drain water, in case water suddenly appears. The ceiling is semicircular, an inverted arch, the strongest shape. The load is distributed evenly along the arch rather than pressing down on a single point. In 2 places where the rock seemed unstable, he set up stone supports, pillars made of flat slabs stacked on top of each other. No mortar, He didn't have any mortar, just weight and friction. But he hewn each slab so that it fit tightly, no gaps. It took him 4 days of work, 4 days for 2 supports that might never be needed, but which would prevent him from waking up under a landslide. Ventilation. He dug 2 shafts, vertical, narrow, the diameter of a palm, one at the tunnel entrance, the second at the face. He dug them from the bottom up, lying on his back. He struck upward with a pickaxe, and debris rained down on his face and into his eyes. He covered his eyes with a rag. He worked by touch. Each shaft took 3 days. When the second shaft broke through the surface and he saw a circle of gray sky from below, he lay on his back, breathing heavily and evenly, like after a sprint. Then he lit a torch at the lower entrance. The flame tilted. A draft began. The air in the tunnel became fresh. He could work for hours without getting dizzy. He could build a fire for thermal tunneling without the risk of suffocating. 2 holes in the ceiling, each the size of a fist, and they changed everything. By the end of the 2nd month, the tunnel was ready. 12 meters, straight, sloping, with 2 ventilation shafts, with 2 supports, with a smooth floor and a semicircular vault. He stood at the end of the tunnel with a torch and looked down the long corridor leading toward the distant gray light of the entrance. And he didn't see a tunnel. He saw rooms. At the end of the tunnel, the rock opened up into a natural cavity. He began to work on it. He leveled the floor. He widened the walls. He carved out a sleeping niche, a deep one, like a train bunk, comfortable to lie down in. Walls on either side. The heat doesn't escape. A second niche nearby, for storage. A third niche, for tools. In the center of the chamber, a stone table. Not a table. A stone ledge that he had chiseled into a flat surface. A workspace. Here he would sketch plans with charcoal on flat stones. Here he will calculate loads and angles and material costs. This was his workshop and his study and his home. 20 meters beneath the cliff. A constant temperature of 12 degrees. Silence. Only the dripping of water somewhere deep below and the faint hum of the wind in the ventilation shafts. Winter had come, and he hadn't noticed. Outside, the temperature had dropped. The wind turned icy. The trees on the island drooped and darkened. The sea turned leaden. The waves grew higher and fiercer. Going outside was unpleasant. But inside the tunnel, nothing had changed. The same 12 degrees, the same dry air, the same warm light from the hearth. He realized this on the 3rd day of the cold, when he went outside for firewood and the wind burned him like boiling water. He stood on the slope, shivering, and then dived back into the tunnel, and the warmth embraced him like a blanket. 12 degrees isn't warm, but after -5 outside, it felt like summer. He smiled. The mountain worked like a thermos. He knew this from textbooks. Now he felt it in his bones. He spent the winter days finishing up the work. He expanded the storage room. He cut shelves into the wall. He made a doorway between the tunnel and the living chamber. Not a door. There was nothing to make a door out of. Just an opening with a stone threshold and a curtain made of sewn-together skins. There were plenty of those small animals on the island. They looked like rabbits, but with long tails. He caught them with snares and ate the meat and tanned the skins with ash and fat. Roughly. It stank, but it kept him warm. He sewed himself something like a jacket, then pants, then shoes. Soft, made of several layers of leather. Not pretty, but his feet stopped freezing. He counted the days. The notches on the wall multiplied. 90, 100, 120. 4 months. He was alive. Alone on the island for 4 months. And he wasn't just surviving. He was living. He had a home. An underground one. Warm. With water and supplies and a workshop. He ate boiled eggs and dried meat for breakfast and drank clean water from an underground spring. He worked on expanding the complex. In the evening, he sat by the hearth and drew up plans for the next day. And sometimes, late at night, when the fire was dying down and the tunnel was quiet, he caught himself thinking, what if no one ever comes? What if he lives here alone until he's old, builds a city under the rock for one person, and dies, and no one would ever know? This thought came to him every night, and every night he answered it the same way. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow, the second level. The storm hit on the 130th day. It came without warning. In the morning, the sky was gray but ordinary. By noon, the wind had picked up. By evening, it was howling. He was up top when the first wave washed over the southern beach and crashed into the rocks with such force that the ground shook beneath his feet. He dropped everything and ran toward the cave entrance. The wind pushed him from behind. The trees around him snapped with a crack like gunshots. He dived into the vestibule and ran to the tunnel. Inside, it was quiet. The walls didn't even tremble. Only the ventilation shafts hummed. He sat on the floor and listened as the world outside fell apart. The storm lasted 2 days. When he went outside, half the trees on the eastern slope lay on the ground. The southern beach was littered with seaweed and debris. His crab traps were gone. The still he no longer used, but had left as a spare, was smashed to pieces. But the tunnel stood. The supports held. The vault hadn't cracked. The ventilation was working. He walked the entire length of the tunnel with a torch, tapping the walls. Hollow, hollow, hollow. Solid as a rock. Not a single new crack. He stepped out into the light and looked at the ravaged island and at his tunnel and said aloud, "Khan, you built it right." After the storm, he found a gift. The sea had washed debris ashore. Planks, lots of planks. The remains of some ship or boat. Broken but intact. Wood, planed, smooth. He hauled them all day, piled them up at the cave entrance. 36 planks of various sizes, some with nails. Nails. Iron nails. He pulled each one out, straightened them on a rock. 22 nails. It was a treasure. With the planks and nails, he could build things that were impossible with stone. Shelves, doors, racks, frames. He carried the boards inside, sorted them by size, set aside the best ones, used the worst ones for firewood, began to build. First, a door. A real door. On wooden hinges. Rough, crooked, but it closed. He hung it in the opening between the tunnel and the living chamber. Closed it. Opened it. Closed it again. The door creaked. It didn't sit straight. Light seeped in around the edges. But it was a door. The first door in his house. Over the second and third months, Daniel dug a 12-meter tunnel with ventilation and drainage. He set up a bedroom, a workshop, and a storage room inside. He survived the winter and a severe storm. The tunnel held up without damage. After the storm, the sea washed up shipwreck debris, and he obtained some planks and 22 iron nails. He built the first door. He saw the body at dawn on the 122nd day. At first, he thought it was a log. A long, dark log on the wet sand of the southern beach. Then the log moved. Daniel froze. Then he ran. The man was lying face down, large, broad-shouldered. His clothes were torn to shreds. His skin was blue from the cold. His left arm was twisted unnaturally. Daniel turned him over. His face was battered. His lips were gray. But his chest was moving, barely noticeable. He was breathing. Daniel acted without thinking. His body switched into that very mode he knew from emergency shifts. Precise, fast, no panic. First, get him out of the water. He grabbed the man by his shirt and dragged him up the beach. Heavy, 90 kilograms. The sand was wet, his feet slipped. He dragged him along, cursing under his breath. 10 meters, 20, to dry sand. Second, check his breathing. Tilted his head to the side. Water flowed from his mouth, lots of water. The man coughed, hoarse and wet, a good sign. Third, warm him up. He took off his fur jacket and covered the man's chest with it, ran to the cave, returned with hot coals in a bowl and some water. He lifted the man's head, poured a little water into his mouth. The man swallowed, then again. Then he opened his eyes. His eyes were gray, cloudy. He looked at Daniel and didn't see him. Then he focused. His lips moved. There was no sound. Daniel leaned closer. The man croaked something. Daniel couldn't make it out. Then he understood. He said one word, water. Daniel gave him more water. The man drank greedily, choked, coughed, drank again. Then he went limp and lost consciousness. Daniel sat nearby and thought. 4 months. He had been alone for 4 months. And now, a person, alive, with a broken arm and a battered face, but alive. He didn't know what he was feeling. Joy, fear, relief, all at once. He decided not to think about it now. Right now, he had to drag the 90-kilogram body into the cave, up the slope, through the vestibule, through the tunnel. He looked at the slope and at the body and said aloud, "Damn, this is going to be a long day." He made a stretcher out of 2 long sticks and a piece of hide. He rolled the man onto it, pulled, slowly, stopping every 10 steps. By noon, he had dragged him into the living chamber and laid him on his own bed, covered him with hides, stoked the fire to maximum. It became almost hot in the chamber. The man tossed and turned in a delirium, mumbled something, names, some kind of commands, something about shrouds and the foremast, a sailor. Daniel examined him as best he could. His left arm was broken, a fracture in the forearm. The bone wasn't sticking out. Closed fracture, that's good. Ribs, 2 or 3. He couldn't tell for sure. When pressed, the man groaned and flinched even in his delirium. Head, a laceration on the temple, deep. The blood had caked over. More cuts, abrasions, bruises, the standard set of injuries after a shipwreck. Daniel did what he could. He washed the wounds with clean water. He made a splint for the arm out of 2 straight sticks and wrapped it with strips of cloth. Not a medic, not a doctor, an engineer. But an engineer who had worked on construction sites where people were crushed by beams, and he had seen how paramedics did it. He set the arm straight, or hoped it was straight. The man came to on the 2nd day, opened his eyes, clear, gray. He looked at the stone ceiling, at the light of the fire, at Daniel, who was sitting across from him, whittling a new stick for a trap with a blade. The man asked where he was. Daniel replied that he was on an island. The man asked which island. Daniel said the island had no name. The man was silent for a moment. Then he asked who he was. Daniel replied that he was an engineer. The man looked at the stone walls and the ceiling and the door and the niches with tools and the hearth with its steady draft. And he said that for an engineer on a deserted island, he had it pretty well set up. Daniel almost smiled. His name was Ezra Finch, 38 years old, a ship's carpenter. He had been traveling on a merchant bark from Havenrich to a colony in the southern archipelago, the Storm, the very one that had nearly blown Daniel's trees away. The bark had been wrecked on the reefs, a crew of 26. He didn't know if anyone else had survived. Most likely not. He himself shouldn't have survived. A plank. He'd been clinging to a plank, 2 days, maybe 3. Then a wave had washed him ashore here. He told the story in an even voice. No trembling, no tears. Daniel listened and recognized that voice. The voice of a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. He knew that voice because he heard it every day. His own. Ezra was recovering slowly. His arm was healing crookedly. Daniel tightened the splint twice. He realigned the bone by feel. Ezra clenched his teeth and didn't make a sound. He just turned pale as a ghost. His ribs hurt for another month, but after 2 weeks, he was already getting up. After 3, he was walking. After 4, he started working. Daniel didn't ask him to. Ezra got up on his own one morning and said he needed to do something with his hands or he'd go crazy. Daniel understood. He gave him an axe, a real one, made of stone and wood and a scrap of iron, rough but functional. He pointed to a stack of logs from trees felled by the storm. He said he needed beams, straight ones, 2 meters long, a palm's width in diameter, for the floor joists. Ezra took the axe, examined it, turned it over in his hands, said the axe was junk. Daniel nodded. Ezra said he could make a better one. Daniel nodded again. Ezra went to make the axe. It was different with the 2 of them. completely different. Not twice as fast, 10 times faster. Not because Ezra was stronger, he was, broad shoulders and the heavy hands of a carpenter. But it wasn't about strength. It was about the division of labor. Daniel designed, Ezra built. Daniel spoke, "I need a frame of these dimensions with grooves here and here." Ezra nodded, and 2 days later the frame was standing, precise, even. Carpentry, not engineering, a different skill. Daniel could calculate the load on a beam, but to make a beam that would fit perfectly into a groove and not budge without a single nail, only Ezra could do that. His hands knew wood as Daniel's hands knew stone. Together, they were a system, complete, functional. The 5th month. They started the 2nd level, below the living quarters, the workshop. Daniel designed it in an evening, with charcoal on a flat stone, a room 4 by 6 meters, ceiling height 2.5 meters, entrance from the main tunnel via a sloped ramp, ventilation through a separate shaft. In the center, a forge, not a furnace, a forge, for working with metal. Ezra looked at the drawing and asked where the draft would come from. Daniel explained, "Natural. The elevation difference between the lower entrance and the upper exit of the ventilation shaft creates a constant flow of air. The greater the difference, the stronger the draft. The workshop is on the lower level. The shaft exit is at the top. A 15-meter drop. That's enough to heat the bellows to forging temperature. No bellows needed. No manual blowing is needed. The island itself blows into the forge." Ezra listened and said nothing. Then he said that if this was true, Daniel was either a genius or a madman. Daniel said it was most likely both. They began to dig. The forge was up and running by the 6th month. They built it out of fire brick. Basalt wasn't suitable, but on the eastern shore, Daniel found outcrops of a lighter rock, similar to tuff, porous, lightweight, heat-resistant. They built the furnace chamber out of it. They carved the air intake pipe directly into the rock. It ran from the lower entrance to the base of the furnace. Daniel narrowed it at the point where it entered, the Venturi effect. Narrowing the channel accelerates the flow. Air entered the furnace with such force that the coals glowed white. Ezra placed a piece of iron on the coals, a fragment of an anchor chain found on the shore after the storm. The iron heated up to red hot, then to orange. Ezra picked it up with tongs made from 2 sticks and placed it on a stone anvil. He struck it. With a hammer made of heavy stone tied to the handle, the iron gave way. It flattened out. Ezra struck rhythmically, blow after blow, a turn, a blow. An hour later, a blade lay on the anvil, rough, thick, but a blade, a real knife. Not a scrap of shackles, a knife. Ezra picked it up and examined it, said it was crap. But crap you could make something decent out of if there was more iron. Daniel nodded. There would be iron. The sea brings it. They worked like a machine. Morning, breakfast, briefing. Daniel explained the day's task. Ezra nodded or argued. They argued often. Ezra thought Daniel spent too much time on calculations. Daniel thought Ezra was in too much of a hurry. These were healthy arguments, productive ones. They made both of them better. During the day, each at his own workstation, Daniel chiseled the stone. Ezra worked the wood. In the evening, dinner by the hearth, silence or conversation. Ezra said little, almost nothing about himself. Daniel didn't ask. He saw Ezra's hands, how they would sometimes freeze in the middle of work, how he would stare into space, how once, in the middle of the night, Daniel heard him crying in his little room, quietly, choked back, like a man who was used to crying so that no one would hear. Daniel lay there, listening and saying nothing. He didn't know what had happened to Ezra before the shipwreck. He knew it was too soon to ask. The end of the 6th month, half a year. The underground complex had 2 levels. The upper level, living quarters, a tunnel, a bedroom, a storage room. The lower level, a workshop, a forge, a tool shed. Between them, a sloping passageway with stone steps, rough but even. 2 exits to the outside. One through the vestibule on the north slope, the second through the upper passage to the east slope. A month's supply of food, dried meat, smoked fish. Ezra had taught him how to fish with a line, salted eggs, root vegetables, water in 3 stone reservoirs. Daniel stood in the doorway of the upper entrance and looked out at the sea. The horizon was empty, not a single sail. 6 months ago, he had been cast out here to die. The sentence had sounded simple: exile at sea, a gentle execution. He was supposed to die of thirst on the 3rd day, or from the cold on the 1st night, or from hunger in a week. Instead, he stood in the doorway of the house he had built with his own hands. Beneath his feet, 2 levels carved into the rock. Behind him, the warm glow of the forge and the sound of Ezra's hammer. He lives better than the average sailor in Haven Rich Harbor. He lives better than he did in Seattle, to be honest. Less paperwork. He found the vein in the 8th month. It happened on an ordinary morning. He was expanding the lower level, chiseling through the rock toward the south, planning a 3rd level, a storage level, for long-term supplies. He struck the wall with his chisel. The sound was different. Not a dull thud against a monolith, not the ringing snap of a crack. It's something in between. Hollow. As if there were empty space behind the wall. He froze. He struck again. The same sound. He pressed his ear against the stone. Silence. But not dead. Alive. As if something large and dark were breathing behind the wall. He took a step back. He looked at the wall. Basalt. Dark. But here the rock looked different. Slightly lighter. Slightly smoother. As if someone had once worked on this surface. He ran his fingers over the stone. Beneath a layer of dust and mineral deposits, his fingers felt a line. Smooth. Too smooth for nature. He picked up the torch and held it up to the wall. In the yellow light, a pattern emerged. Not a crack, not a vein, a line. Straight, horizontal, a meter long. Then a turn, vertical. Another turn, a rectangle, carved into the stone. He stood there looking at this rectangle and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. It was a doorway, bricked up, by someone, once upon a time. A very long time ago. He didn't break down the wall, not right away. First, he sat on the floor and thought. For a long time. An hour, maybe 2. The torch burned out, and he lit a new one. Behind the wall was a space, man-made, old. How many years? Hundreds, maybe thousands. The mineral deposits on the surface spoke of centuries. Someone had built here long before Havenrich and Sanva. Someone who knew how to cut basalt in straight lines. That was important. That was very important. And that was exactly why he couldn't just barge inside. He didn't know what was in there. Gases, water, a collapse, or something else. Something he couldn't predict. He stood up and went back upstairs. He didn't say anything to Ezra. He thought about it for 2 days. On the 3rd, he returned to the wall alone, with tools, with torches, with a rope tied to a stone at the entrance to the lower level. If something went wrong, he'd be able to find his way back in the dark. He began carefully dismantling the masonry. The stones in the opening were fitted tightly, but without mortar. He removed them one by one, carefully. First, second, third. Behind the 4th stone, a draft of air came through. Cold, dry, odorless. A good sign. No rot, no standing water, no methane. He removed 3 more stones. The opening was large enough to slip his hand through with a torch. He slipped it through. The flame didn't go out. It leaned inward. A draft. So there's a second exit behind the wall. Somewhere. Far. But it's there. He removed the remaining stones. The opening was fully exposed. 2 meters 20 in height, 70 centimeters in width. Small, for small people. Or for people who didn't want anyone large to be able to enter. He went in, crouching, torch in his outstretched hand. The first thing he saw were the walls, smooth, perfectly smooth, not hewn, not carved, as if someone had removed a whole layer of rock, like with a router, The surface was even and slightly shiny in the torchlight. He ran his hand over it. Cold, dry, no tool marks, no scratches, no impact marks, nothing. It was impossible. He knew what stone worked with a chisel looked like. He knew what stone worked with a circular saw looked like. He knew what stone worked with pressurized water looked like. This was none of those things. He walked on. A corridor. Straight, long. He took 20 steps. 30. The corridor sloped downward at a slight angle. Maybe 3 degrees, maybe 5. On the walls, he began to see symbols. Carved into the stone. Thin lines forming patterns. Not letters, not hieroglyphs. Something else. Geometric shapes. Circles inscribed in rectangles. Lines radiating from the center like the spokes of a wheel. Repeating patterns. He couldn't read them, but he could see them. And the further he went, the more of them there were. After 50 steps, the corridor led him into a chamber, a large one. He raised the torch, but the light didn't reach the far wall. The ceiling was high, 3 meters, 4. The floor was even, smooth like the walls. He took a step inside and stopped, because he saw a vein. It ran along the far wall, from floor to ceiling, wide, as thick as a palm, and it was unlike anything he knew. Not ore, not a mineral vein, not quartz, something dark, with a metallic sheen, but not iron, not copper, not tin. He stepped closer, reached out his hand, and when his fingers touched the surface of the vein, he felt heat, faint, like from a cup of tea that had cooled 10 minutes ago. He pulled his hand back. He looked at his fingers. Nothing. No marks. He reached out again. Warmth, definitely. The metal was reacting to his touch, to the presence of living tissue. He withdrew his hand. The warmth vanished. Daniel stood in the darkness of the ancient chamber before a vein of unknown metal that sensed his presence. And for the first time in 8 months on this island, he didn't know what to do. He spent 2 hours in the tunnel. He walked around the chamber, found 2 more corridors leading off in different directions, didn't go down them, too deep, too many unknowns. He returned to the opening, went out, and blocked the opening with stones again, every stone in its place, tightly, neatly, just as it had been. Then he sprinkled it with stone dust. Then he smoothed it over with dust and mineral deposits he'd gathered from the adjacent wall. An hour later, there were no traces left. The wall looked exactly as it had before he'd opened it. He went upstairs. Ezra was standing by the forge, hammering a bracket for a new door. He looked at Daniel. He asked if everything was all right. Daniel said yes, everything was fine. He was just tired. Ezra nodded and went back to work. Daniel sat by the hearth and stared into the fire. He had found something that, by the logic of this world, shouldn't exist. Smooth walls worked by non-human tools. Symbols, metal that senses life. And he didn't know who to tell about it, or whether to tell anyone at all. He didn't tell. Not because he didn't trust Ezra, because he didn't know what to say. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know what the consequences might be. And until he knew, he kept quiet. An engineer's habit. Don't report it until you've figured it out. Don't sound the alarm until you understand what the problem is. He sealed off the tunnel and went back to work. The 3rd level was needed even without ancient secrets. A storage level, for supplies. Winter had shown that a month's supply wasn't enough. A 6-month supply was needed. He began digging in another direction, to the east, further from the tunnel, further from the smooth walls and warm metal. The 9th month brought another person. He found her by accident. He climbed the western cliff to get some eggs and saw movement in the rocks below. A flash, and it vanished. He froze. Waited. Movement again. Someone was hiding in a crevice between the rocks. Small. Quick. He climbed down lower, carefully, and saw her. A woman. Young. Skinny to the point of transparency. Dirty. Her clothes hung in tatters. She sat in the crevice and looked at him with huge eyes, like a cornered animal. He stopped. Didn't get any closer. Raised his hands, palms forward. She huddled against the rock. He slowly sat down on the ground, to be lower, not to loom over her. Then he said quietly that he wouldn't hurt her, that he had food and water, that she could take it and leave. She didn't answer. He placed a piece of dried meat and a bowl of water on the rock in front of him. He stood up, walked back 10 paces, sat down again, waited. She didn't move. He waited some more. Then he stood up and left. He returned the next day. The meat and water were gone. He left more. He left. This went on for 4 days. On the 5th day, she was sitting not in the crevice, but next to it, on a rock. She was looking at him. She was still afraid, but she wasn't hiding anymore. He sat down at a distance. He set out the food. She took it. She ate greedily. She choked. He said nothing. He didn't ask anything. She finished eating and said one word. Her name. Kathleen. Kathleen Orr. She told her story a week later, piece by piece. Not because she didn't want to, because she couldn't. Every time she started talking about the past, her hands shook and her voice faded. Daniel didn't rush her. He fed her. He gave her work, simple work, sorting through roots, sorting stones, washing seaweed. She needed her hands busy so her mind wouldn't eat itself from the inside. He knew that feeling. Gradually, the pieces fell into place. A maid, from Senator Havenrick's house. 6 years in service, invisible like a piece of furniture. She served dinner, stood by the wall, listened, memorized. Memorized everything, every word, every name, every deal spoken aloud at the table where she was considered part of the decor. And then she heard what she wasn't supposed to hear, a conversation between 2 senators, about the expedition's failure, about how the failure wasn't accidental, about how someone had to be sent to the island. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to be afraid, and she ran. 3 weeks in the hold of a fishing schooner. Then they found her, threw her overboard. She floated, for a long time. She washed up on the island. She had been there 4 days before Daniel found her. 4 days among the rocks, without water, without food, without hope. Daniel listened and said nothing. Then he asked just one thing. Does she remember the senator's name from that conversation? Kathleen remembered. Marcus Brandt. Daniel nodded. He wasn't surprised, as if he'd been expecting it. He didn't tell her he knew that name. Didn't tell her that Brandt had signed his death warrant. Not now. She had enough on her plate as it was. He gave her a small room, next to his bedroom. A tiny niche in the wall expanded to the size of a small room. He hung a curtain made of animal hide, brought a bedding, fresh, soft, pine needles and dry moss. Showed her where the water was, where the food was, where the exits were. 2 exits. Always 2 exits. She listened silently and nodded. On the 3rd day, she began to help, without being asked. She went through the supplies, arranged them in the alcoves, sorted them, organized them. She had order in her mind, rigid, precise. 6 years in the senator's house where every fork had its place. A habit that had been a prison became a resource. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything. He just started asking her where things were, and she always knew, without hesitation. Ezra accepted her calmly, without questions. He moved over at the table, poured some tea. Daniel saw how Kathleen ate standing against the wall the first few days, like a servant, automatically. He didn't say anything. He just pointed to a chair every time she stood up. She sat down, stood up. He pointed. After a week, she sat down on her own. It was a small victory, one of those you don't notice unless you're looking. By the end of the 9th month, there were 3 of them. The complex was growing. The 3rd level, the storage area, large. A long corridor with niches on both sides, like a wine cellar, only instead of wine, there was dried meat and salted fish and roots and dried seaweed and eggs and ash and containers of water. Daniel took inventory, with charcoal on a stone slab at the entrance to the storage area. A list, quantity, date stored. He showed it to Kathleen and said that from now on, this was her area. She would keep track of everything. She looked at him strangely, as if she didn't understand. He repeated himself. You keep track of everything. You remember everything. You know where everything is. You're the best storekeeper I've ever met. She stood there silently, and he saw her chin tremble. But she didn't cry. She just nodded. and went to count the supplies. He heard her mutter the numbers in a quiet, even voice, and the corners of her mouth were slightly turned up, just a tiny bit. In the 8th month, Daniel discovered an ancient tunnel behind the wall of the lower level, with smooth walls, strange symbols, and a vein of an unknown, warm metal. He sealed the entrance and told no one. In the 9th month, Kathleen Orr washed up on the island, a runaway maid from Senator Havenrich's house, who remembers a conversation about the deliberate failure of the expedition and knows the name of Marcus Brant. Daniel integrated her into the community and put her in charge of the storeroom. Meyer appeared at the end of the 10th month, not from the shore, from the water. Daniel was standing on the eastern cliff, looking out at the bay, when he saw a head in the waves, a small, dark dot moving between the reefs as if it knew every rock. The dot drew closer and became a woman. She surfaced at the foot of the cliff, tanned, muscular, short dark hair clinging to her skull, a long white scar on her collarbone. She looked up at Daniel and said something in a language he didn't know. He shook his head. She tried again, in the archipelago's trade dialect, with a strong accent but understandable. She asked if there was water here. He nodded. She climbed up the cliff, without a rope, without help. Her hands and feet clung to the rock as if she'd been doing this her whole life. A minute later, she was standing in front of him, half a head shorter, skinny, wet, with chapped lips. He gave her the canteen. She drank half and handed it back. Then she said her name was Mire, that she was a diver, that a storm had swept her boat away 3 days ago, that she'd been swimming for a long time. He didn't ask where from. He didn't ask why. He led her inside, just like with Kathleen, just like with Ezra. First water, then food, then warmth. Questions later. Mire was different. Not quiet like Kathleen, not silent like Ezra. Loud, direct. She ate and talked at the same time. She told him everything in one evening. Hanyo, a diver from a small archipelago to the southeast. The women of her village had been diving for shellfish and seaweed and pearls for generations. She was the best. She could hold her breath longer than anyone. She dived deeper than anyone. She saw underwater as if she'd been born with her eyes open in salt water. Then the storm. That very same big storm that washed Ezra ashore. It swept across the edge of her archipelago. Boats were wrecked. People were swept away. Her younger brother, 16 years old, he was right there in the water. She saw his head above the wave. Then she didn't. She dived after him, once, twice, 5 times, 10 times. She didn't find him. The wave dragged her under too. She told this in a steady voice, without tears. Only her hands lay motionless on the table, like stone. Daniel was silent. Ezra was silent. Kathleen placed a mug of hot herbal tea in front of her. Meyer looked at the mug and said thank you. The first word she spoke, quietly. She didn't sit idle a single day. The morning after she arrived, she went down to the eastern cove and dove in. She was underwater so long that Daniel started counting the seconds. 60, 90, 120. He was about to jump in when she surfaced, calm, her hands full of shellfish. She climbed onto the rocks and said the cove was good, deep. The bottom was clean. The entrance was narrow, but a boat if you know where to turn. The current runs from south to north. That means it carries debris out. That means the water inside is always cleaner than outside. She explained this in a businesslike tone, like an engineer describing a site. Daniel listened, and a diagram was already forming in his mind. A cove, a grotto, a harbor, a place to keep a boat, a place from which to set out to sea. Mir knew the water as well as he knew stone. She could feel the current with her skin. She read the depth by the color. She understood the reefs by the sound of the waves. It was a resource, not muscles, not strength, knowledge. He began designing the harbor that very evening, the 11th month, 4 of them. The rhythm had changed again. Morning planning meeting, now longer, 4 people, 4 opinions. Ezra wanted to build a boat. Mir wanted to clear the entrance to the cove of rocks. Kathleen said they needed to increase supplies. Winter was coming, for the second time. Daniel listened to everyone. Then he assigned tasks. Ezra on the boat, a sketch for now, then the frame. Mir at the cove, surveying the seabed, mapping the reefs. Kathleen on supplies, taking inventory, planning. He himself continued to expand the third level. Digging, chopping, hauling out the rock. In the evening, they gathered around the hearth, ate together, spoke little. But it was a different kind of silence, not loneliness. The silence of people who were honestly exhausted. Mire worked like a woman possessed, 4 hours in the water every day. Daniel told her that was too much. She replied that he didn't know the sea and should mind his own business. He didn't argue, but he started watching her. Once she came back blue and shivering and couldn't warm up for 2 hours. He led her to the hearth and said that if she died of hypothermia, who would map the bay? She looked at him with angry eyes. Then she laughed, briefly, sharply, like a bark. And she said he was a bore. He nodded. He knew he was a bore. Being a bore had saved his life in the mines. It would save hers, too. He watched her work. It was beautiful. Not in a romantic sense, in an engineering sense. Every movement precise, economical. Not a single wasted stroke. She entered the water like a tool fits into a groove. No splashes, no noise. She went down and came back with information. Rock here, sand here, strong current here, weak current here. You can set an anchor ring here, not here. She drew diagrams in the wet sand with a stick, rough but clear. Daniel redrew them with charcoal on a rock. He aligned them with the land map. The result was a three-dimensional model. The island from above, the island from below. Above the water and below the water. He had never seen a map like this, and it was possible only because Mire saw what he did not. They began building the harbor together. Daniel designed it. Mire made adjustments. The cove had an entrance 5 meters wide between two rock walls. The depth at the entrance was 2 meters at high tide, 1.5 at low tide. Inside, the cove widened, 10 by 15 meters, 3 meters deep. The bottom was rocky. The walls were vertical, a perfect grotto. 3 things needed to be done. First, remove the rocks at the entrance that were blocking the boat's passage. Mire dived down and tied ropes around the rocks. Daniel and Ezra pulled from above, slowly, rock by rock. Second, drive anchor rings into the walls of the grotto, iron brackets forged by Ezra. Mire dived with a hammer and a bracket and drove them in underwater, at the depth where she could hold her breath. 2 meters. He remembered that number. Third, connect the grotto to the underground complex. That was Daniel's job. He was chiseling a tunnel from the lower level toward the cove, through the rock, meter by meter. When the tunnel emerged into the grotto wall at a level of 1.5 meters above the water, he broke through the opening and saw the sea. Inside the grotto, calm, green, with glints on the ceiling. He widened the opening to the size of a doorway. Now it was possible to exit the storage room directly onto a stone ledge above the water, to load the boat, or unload it, without having to go to the surface, invisible. By the end of the 11th month, the harbor was ready, small, primitive, but functional. There was no boat yet. Ezra was building the frame from wood felled by the storm. The work was slow. He had one tool, an axe, one helper, Kathleen, who held the planks while he hewed them. But the frame was taking shape. There would be a boat. Not tomorrow, not in a week, in a month, 2, but there would be. The 12th month, a year. Daniel stood at the entrance to the vestibule and watched the sunset. 365 notches on the wall. A year ago, he had been washed up on this shore with his hands tied, in a wet shirt, with nothing. Now behind him was a 3-level underground complex, residential, work, storage, with a smithy and a workshop and a pantry stocked for 6 months and a harbor inside the grotto. 3 people lived with him, a carpenter, a diver, a girl with a photographic memory. He built them a home, for each of them. Ezra got a room with a wide cot and shelves for tools. Kathleen got a niche by the wall where it was quiet and warm, and a curtain closed it off completely. Meyer got a small room closer to the exit to the cove, so that in the morning the water was just 2 steps away. He knew what she needed, not because he asked, because he watched. Meyer got up before dawn. Meyer went to the water first thing, so her room had to be closer to the water. Simple logic. Engineering logic. But when he showed her the little room with direct access to the grotto, she looked at him silently, for a long time. Then she said he was strange. He asked why. She said that usually men build a house for themselves, but he was building a house for others. He shrugged, said he'd already built a house for himself. The third niche on the left in the main tunnel. That was enough for him. Then came Ezra's anniversary, 5 months since he'd been washed ashore. Daniel had been building for him for a week, in secret. While Ezra worked on the boat, he expanded his little room. He cut a narrow shaft upward in the ceiling, vertical, 4 meters long. On the surface, he camouflaged the exit with rocks and bushes, but he left a slit, through which the sky was visible, a small well of light. When the sun was in the right position, a ray fell directly onto the cot. In the evening, the stars were visible. He called Ezra over in the evening, said he wanted to show him something, led him into the little room. Ezra looked up, at a circle of dark sky in the stone well, at 3 stars that shone within that circle as if framed. Daniel said quietly, "Ezra, this is your home. Not yet, not temporarily. Home." Ezra stood motionless. Then he nodded. Once. He left. Daniel heard him walking through the tunnel, how he stopped, how he leaned against the wall. He didn't follow him. In the morning, Ezra came to the planning meeting as usual, with red eyes. No one said anything. In the 10th month, a diver named Mire appeared, having lost her boat and her brother in a storm. She mapped the underwater part of the bay and, together with Daniel, designed a grotto harbor with an underground exit to the water. By the end of the year, the underground complex on the island had 3 levels and a harbor. Daniel built a personal space for each person, tailored to their needs. Ezra got a room with a well-like window to the sky. The first foreign sail appeared 3 months after the anniversary. The morning was clear, and Mire was the first to spot it. She had climbed the western cliff to gather shellfish and saw a white dot on the horizon. She ran back down. She said one word, "Sail." Daniel went upstairs and looked. The ship was coming from the west, large, 2 masts, merchant or military, impossible to tell from a distance. It was sailing confidently, but then began to slow down. Reefs. That very belt of reefs that protected the island better than any fortress. The ship circled around, 2 hours. Then it turned around and headed west. The reefs wouldn't let it through. But Daniel stood on the cliff and watched the receding sail, and he understood. Time is running out. Sooner or later, someone will find a way through. Or someone will build a boat with a draft shallow enough to pass over the reefs. Or someone will simply wait for high tide and slip through. The island won't remain hidden forever. We need defenses. He started thinking about it that very day. That evening, at the communal table, he told everyone. Someone has seen us, or will see us soon. We need to prepare. Ezra nodded. Mira asked what exactly they were preparing for. Kathleen was silent, but her eyes were wide. Daniel said he didn't know the details yet, but he knew the principle. They couldn't fight. 4 against a ship's crew meant certain death. They could hide, but they couldn't hide forever. So they needed a third option. Make landing on the island cost more than it was worth. Not to win, to make it unprofitable. He fell silent. Then he said he needed a week. He would think it over. For a week, he walked around the island. He looked. He counted. He drew. With charcoal on flat stones he carried to the workshop and laid out on the floor. A map of the island from above. A map of the reefs. A map of the currents that Mir had drawn up. A map of the underground complex. all together, a three-dimensional model in his head. He saw the island as an organism: skin, rocks and forest, skeleton, basalt rock, circulatory system, tunnels and shafts, lungs, ventilation, stomach, pantry. He needed to add an immune system, a defense that works on its own, without an army, without a garrison, without cannons, which they don't have. A defense that uses what's available: stone, gravity, water, knowledge of the terrain. A week later, he gathered everyone and laid out his plan on the table. 6 nodes. The first, false entrances, 3 of them, on the southern shore, on the western cliff, on the northern slope. Each looks like a real cave entrance. Each leads to a dead end. But the dead end isn't empty. A dead end with a surprise. A sawed-off ledge that will collapse if you go too far in. Not fatal, but enough to block the passage and trap those inside for several hours. Time. He was buying time. The second node, the coastal route. The only real path from the shore to the complex ran through a rocky ravine on the northern slope. Daniel had cut a horizontal tunnel into the ravine's wall. A short one, 3 meters. It opened onto the ravine at chest height. Water could be channeled through it. Lots of water. The reservoir on the 4th level. 300 liters. Open the valve, and water will gush through the pipe made of hollowed-out logs into the tunnel and flood the ravine. It won't kill you, but it will stop you. Try climbing a rocky slope when icy water is pouring down on you from above. Third, observation post, at the top of the island, among the rocks, camouflaged, with a view in all 4 directions. From there, any ship can be spotted an hour before it approaches. Fourth, evacuation route, from the complex through the harbor to a boat and out to sea through the reefs. Mire knew the passage. She was the only one. If things go really bad, they'll leave. Fifth, signal system. Ropes with small stones tied to them stretched from the observation post to the entrance of the complex. Pulled. The stones clattered, quietly, but audible inside. Sixth, emergency supply cache, outside the complex, in a separate cave on the western cliff. Food and water for a week. If the complex is overrun, they have enough supplies to survive a siege or make a getaway. He drew and explained. Ezra watched silently. Meyer nodded. Kathleen listened intently. When he finished, Ezra asked how long it would take. Daniel said 2 months. Ezra said that was a long time. Daniel replied that it couldn't be any shorter, a 3-fold safety margin. Ezra shook his head and said Daniel was crazy. Then he stood up and went to make the beams for the false entrance. They built their defenses for 2 months. It was hard work, methodical, alongside their regular jobs, traps, supplies, expanding the complex. Ezra was finishing the boat, a small one, for 4 people, with a mast and a sail made of sewn-together hides, ugly but seaworthy. Meyer launched it in the grotto and chased it around the bay, checking its stability, checking its maneuverability. The boat didn't respond well. Meyer scolded it as if it were a living creature. "Don't be stubborn. I know you. You'll go where I tell you to." Ezra heard and smirked. Daniel heard and thought the illness was contagious. Everyone talks to inanimate objects. Midway through the 14th month, a year and a half, Daniel stood at the lookout and gazed out at the sea. There were no foreign sails, but he knew they would come. The question wasn't if, the question was when. He went downstairs. He passed the kitchen where Kathleen was arranging dried fish in the niches, past the workshop where Ezra was sharpening a new tool, past the exit to the grotto where Meyer was mending a sail. 4 people in the underground city. He had built a home. Now he had to defend it. And for that, he needed someone who understood war. Because Daniel Kahn was an engineer. He could build a trap. He could design a defense. But he couldn't command a battle. He didn't know how to think like a soldier. He didn't know how people behaved under fire. He built walls. He needed someone who knew how walls held up. 15 months later, the first alien ship appeared on the horizon. The reefs kept it out, but Daniel realized that the time for secrecy was ending. He designed 6 defensive nodes, false entrances with collapses, a floodable coastal passage, an observation post, an evacuation route through the grotto, a signaling system, a supply depot. Ezra built a boat. Daniel realized he needed a military specialist. Sonhua Jisoo arrived with the wreckage. Her ship had found a passage through the reefs, or rather, the reefs had found the ship. A Sonhua scout was heading south along the Kalamo archipelago. Officially a merchant vessel, in reality a military one, with a cartographer on board who was drawing up maps for the Admiralty. A storm drove the ship into the reef zone. The helmsman tried to turn around. He didn't make it in time. The reefs ripped open the hull from the bow to the midship frame. The ship listed to one side and began to sink. Of the 30-member crew, 4 swam to safety. 3 didn't make it to shore. 1 did. Daniel found her on the southern beach. She wasn't lying unconscious like Ezra. She was sitting, back straight, wet, battered by the waves, but sitting. A bundle lay nearby, leather, soaked. She had her hand on it, as if guarding it. Daniel approached. She looked at him. Her eyes were dark, sharp, without fear. She didn't ask where she was, didn't ask who he was. She asked how far this shore was from the southern tip of Kamo Island. Daniel blinked, said he didn't know the exact coordinates. She frowned, as if that were his fault. Then she stood up, swayed. She stood up straight. She said she was an officer in the cartographic service of the Kingdom of Sonhua, that she needed water and shelter, and that the bundle contained her maps, and if he tried to take them, she would break his arm. Daniel said there was no need to break his arm, that there was water and shelter, and he led her inside. Jisoo followed him in silence. When they entered the vestibule, she stopped. She placed her palm on the wall, ran her fingers over the stone, looked at the ceiling, at the vault, at the angle of the curve. Then she walked on, into the tunnel, stopped again. She looked at the supports, at the ventilation shafts, at the slope of the floor. Daniel was silent. He could see she was calculating. Her eyes moved like those of a person taking measurements. She walked the entire length of the tunnel to the living quarters. She looked at the hearth, at the niches, at the door, at the steps leading down. Then she turned to him and asked who had built it. He said he had. She asked how many people were on his team. He said 4, including him. She was silent for a moment. Then she said it was impossible. 4 people couldn't carve out such a complex in basalt in a year. He said it took a year and a half, and that the basalt was fissured. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said she was a cartographer and a fortification engineer, and that she had seen fortresses all along the Sonhua coast, and that this complex was better than half of them. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He said thank you. She said it wasn't a compliment, it's an assessment. Jisoo was difficult. For the first week, she didn't speak to anyone but Daniel, and with him, she spoke only about business. Cold, precise. She asked questions he couldn't always answer. What is the load-bearing capacity of the vault in the chamber on the 2nd level? He gave an estimate. She said that an estimate was unacceptable. He said he didn't have the instruments. She said the calculation could be done based on the vault's geometry and the rock's density. He knew that, but he didn't have time. He built with a triple safety margin precisely because he couldn't calculate exactly. She nodded. She said that a triple safety margin was a waste of resources. He said that a triple safety margin was life insurance. She was silent. Then she said he was right. But her tone was as if admitting he was right caused her physical pain. She checked everything, every tunnel, every shaft, every support, every corner. She walked with a torch, measured in paces, and wrote something down on soggy sheets from her bundle. The bundle turned out to be a set of maps and drafting tools, a ruler, a protractor, a compass, a pen, and the remains of ink. The tools were hers, personal. She carried them with her like a soldier carries a weapon. By the 2nd week, she had laid out her map of his complex in front of Daniel, an accurate one, to scale, with elevation marks, showing the direction of the ventilation flows. Daniel looked at the map and said nothing. For a year and a half, he had been drawing with charcoal on stones, roughly, from memory, and she had done in 10 days what he couldn't, a professional drawing. He looked at her and said he needed her help. She asked what for. He said for the defense. He showed her his 6 nodes. She listened in silence. Then she went over each one. False entrances. Good, but not enough. We need trails, paths leading to the false entrances, trodden, obvious ones, so the enemy would follow them instead of looking for the real entrance. A coastal route with flooding. Good, but we need a second valve, an emergency one, in case the first one jams. An observation post. Bad, just one. We need 3, from different sides, with a signaling system between them. An evacuation route. Good, but there's only one boat for 4 people. Now there are 5 of them. She listed her observations in an even voice, without emotion, like an officer at a debriefing. Daniel listened and nodded. Every observation was correct. He could have seen each one himself if he'd thought like a military man instead of an engineer. When she finished, he silently laid all his blueprints in front of her and said, "Jisoo, I'm an engineer. I'm not a military man. We need you here." She looked at the blueprints, then at him. Something changed in her face. Not a smile. Jisoo wasn't smiling. Something calmer, as if something inside had clicked into place. She said she needed 2 days. Daniel nodded. 2 days later, she brought a new defense plan, complete, detailed, with reaction times, retreat routes, and blocking points. Professional, military. Daniel looked it over and realized they could hold out. Jisoo was thawing out slowly, slower than Kathleen, slower than Ezra. She wasn't used to being among people who didn't obey her by the book and didn't despise her for her gender. She was used to 2 modes, commanding and enduring. Here, it was neither. Here, they listened to her because she knew, and that confused her. Once, Daniel heard her give a command to Myre, sharply, like an officer to a sailor. Myre looked at her and told her to go to hell. Jisoo froze. She opened her mouth. She closed it. Then she turned and walked away. That evening, Daniel found her at the observation post. She was sitting and looking at the horizon. He sat down beside her. He was silent. She said she didn't know how to talk to people. He said that was okay. She said that back home she'd been removed from command because she was a woman, sent to draw maps, as if it were a disgrace. She said it evenly, without a tremor, but he heard something heavy beneath her steady voice, like a stone under water. He said that maps aren't a disgrace. Maps are weapons. Whoever knows the territory owns it. She looked at him. He said that her defense plan was the best he could have come up with in a year, and that if anyone tried to land on this island, she would be in command. Not him, she, because she knows how, and he doesn't. She was silent for a long time. Then she nodded, once, briefly. She stood up and left. From that day on, she spoke to Mire normally, not warmly. Jisoo wasn't warm, but evenly, as with an equal. In the 16th month, a storm wrecked a Sunhwa reconnaissance vessel on the reefs. One survived. Cartographer officer Sunhwa Jisoo. She assessed the underground complex as a professional fortifier and found weaknesses in the defense plan. Daniel handed over command of the defense to her. Jisoo drew up a complete military plan for the island's defense. She carries the pain of humiliation from her homeland, where she was removed from command because of her gender. In the 17th month, Evelyn Marshall arrived. Daniel saw her from the observation post, a tiny figure on the southern beach. Nearby, the wreckage of something large. He went down. She was standing ankle-deep in the water, looking at the wreckage. Blonde, freckled, in a torn dress made of expensive fabric. She turned to him, and the first thing she said was, "You live here." Not a question, a statement. She looked at the path leading up the slope, at the stones laid too evenly, at the carved steps, and she came to a conclusion. Daniel took stock. He asked what had happened. She said her ship had crashed on the reefs, a merchant bark, her father's. He was the captain. Was. She uttered that word and fell silent for a second. Then she continued in an even voice. A crew of 14, all dead. She swam out, doesn't know how, clung to the hatch cover and held on for 2 days. Daniel led her inside. Evie. She asked to be called that. On the third day, when she stopped sleeping 16 hours a day and started walking around the complex, she went everywhere. She peered into every nook and cranny. She touched the walls. She asked Kathleen what was in every jar in the storeroom. She asked Ezra how he secured the bulkheads. She asked Meyer what the depth of the bay was at high tide. She asked Jisoo how the alarm system worked. She soaked up information like a sponge, not deep, wide. A week later, she knew more about the complex than Ezra, who had lived there for a year. Not because she was smarter, because she asked everyone about everything without hesitation. Daniel watched her, 19 years old, the captain's daughter, raised in ports. She'd seen ships in shipyards and warehouses since childhood. Her father dragged her everywhere, not because he loved her, because his wife had died and he didn't know what to do with her. She mentioned this in passing, without bitterness, like a fact. Her father used to say she wouldn't amount to anything serious, that she was just a decoration, that her job was to marry well. She grew up with that as background noise, not fighting it, just ignoring it, and continuing to hang out in ports and shipyards and soak it all in. Now her father is gone. The ship is gone. The dowry is gone. There is an island in a reef zone and an underground city and 6 people who don't consider her a decoration. Because decorations aren't needed here. Here, hands and a head are needed. 2 weeks after arriving, she altered her dress, by herself, without help. She unpicked the expensive fabric and made work clothes out of it, short, comfortable, with pockets. Daniel watched her do it and thought that a girl who alters a ball gown into a work smock without shedding a single tear deserves more than the word ornament. He put her in the warehouse. Not right away. At first, he watched. She helped Kathleen for 2 days. On the third day, Kathleen came to him and said quietly that Evie calculated faster than she did, that Evie memorized numbers on the first try, that in a single day, Evie had organized the east wing of the warehouse so that now any item could be found in half a minute. Kathleen wasn't complaining. She admired her, quietly, in her own way. Daniel nodded. That evening at the group dinner, he turned to Ezra and said, "Ezra, how many staples do we have for the boat's planking?" Ezra opened his mouth, closed it. He didn't remember. Daniel turned to Evie. "Ask Evie. She runs the warehouse. She knows better than I do." Evie didn't blink. She said, 23 staples. 8 large ones, 15 small ones, 7 small ones with a defect at the bend. She said it calmly, as if it were normal, as if she'd been answering questions like that her whole life. Ezra looked at her, then at Daniel. Then he nodded. Daniel saw how Evie spent the rest of the evening. She was smiling, not broadly, quietly, like someone who, for the first time in their life, had heard that their knowledge was worth something. The 18th month, 6 of them. The complex was growing. The 4th level, the utility level. Daniel designed it differently than the previous ones, not for living, not for work, for life. A communal kitchen, a large chamber with a hearth in the center and stone benches along the walls, a place where everyone could sit together, not cramped, spacious. Next to it, a pantry for food. Next to it, a room for drying and salting. Next to it, a small chamber with stone vats for water, an aqueduct. He had brought water from an underground spring through a channel carved into the stone. The water flowed constantly, a thin stream. It flowed into the vat. It overflowed the edge and drained away. Running water, all year round. Kathleen saw this for the first time and stood there watching for a minute. Then she said that at Senator Havenrich's house, where she had served for 6 years, they had to go to a well for water. But here, the water comes on its own. Daniel said it wasn't magic. It's a slope, 3 degrees. The spring is above the vat. The water flows down. Kathleen said she knew it wasn't magic, but it still looked like magic. Then Hana arrived, the 20th month, a smuggler's boat. They were navigating the reefs in a small, fast vessel, and Mire saw them from the grotto. The boat pulled up to the southern beach. 3 men came ashore. A woman was with them, small, with a long braid, in a simple dress. The men set her down and left, without looking back, like they were dumping unwanted cargo. Daniel saw it from the lookout. He waited until the boat was gone. He went down. She was standing on the sand, looking out at the sea, calm, quiet, as if she were being dropped off on deserted islands every Tuesday. He approached. She turned, looked at him, said her name was Chang Hana, that she was a herbalist, that she had been expelled from the temple, that she had nowhere to go. Her voice was even and quiet, like a stream. Daniel said he had something better than nowhere. He had a place. Hana was the last piece of the puzzle. They didn't know it then, but Daniel realized it later. A herbalist, a doctor, the only person on the island who could heal, not with iron, not with stone, with her hands and herbs and knowledge passed down through generations. She examined everyone in the first week, silently, without permission. She approached, she looked at their skin, their eyes, their nails, their teeth. She touched their necks, their foreheads, their wrists. Then she would leave. A week later, she came to Daniel and said, "Ezra has a sore knee, his left one. He doesn't say anything, but it swells up by evening. Kathleen has stomach problems from monotonous food. She needs different herbs. Meyer is developing an ear infection, the right one, from constantly diving into cold water. Jisoo has headaches from eye strain while working with maps in poor lighting. Evie is fine, young, healthy, but she eats little, needs to be watched." Daniel listened and said nothing. She listed his people's ailments just as he had listed the structural defects. Precise, calm, no panic. He asked what she needed. She said she needed a place to work, well ventilated, with shelves for drying herbs, with stone tables for preparing concoctions. He nodded. He built her a laboratory, on the 4th level, next to the kitchen, but with separate ventilation. A room 3 by 4 meters, high ceiling, a ventilation shaft with an adjustable damper. You can increase the draft for drying, you can reduce it for storage. Stone tables, 2, wide, smooth. Shelves in the walls, 12 niches at different heights, for different herbs. Sloped drying racks. The very same slope she had shown him with her finger, 3 degrees, so that water would drain and air would circulate. He had been building it for 2 weeks. When he brought her in and showed her, she stood in the doorway and said nothing, for a long time. He had already begun to think he'd done something wrong. Then she came in, ran her hand over the table, over the shelves, turned to him and said quietly, all her life she'd been taught that what she knew was a sin, that herbs were heresy, that knowledge was a curse, and he had built her a home for that knowledge. Daniel said, "Hana, your craft is medicine. We have no other here. Without you, we'll all die from the very first festering wound." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw her smile. Not a wide one, just a little, like light passing through a crack in the wall. In the 17th month, Evie Marshall arrived, the daughter of a fallen captain with a phenomenal memory for numbers. Daniel put her in charge of inventory. In the 20th month, smugglers landed the herbalist Hana on the island, exiled from the temple of Anqua for knowledge the church deemed heresy. Daniel built her an herbal laboratory on the 4th level. The community grew to 7 people. The complex had 4 levels with a kitchen, an aqueduct, and a laboratory. The 8th person appeared on his own, not cast ashore by a storm, not dropped off from a boat. He came. In the 21st month, Mire saw a small rowboat from the grotto making its way through the reefs, slowly, carefully. Someone knew the channel, or guessed it. She sent a signal. Pebbles clattered along the rope. Jisoo was at the lookout 3 minutes. 1 man, a small boat, no weapons, no flag. She went down and reported to Daniel. He went out to the southern shore. The guy was young, 20, maybe 22, skinny, tanned from the sun. He had a sailor's calluses on his hands. He pulled the boat onto the sand and saw Daniel and froze. Then he raised his hands. Empty. He said he wasn't an enemy, that he'd heard rumors about a ghost island in Calmo where a light burns beneath the cliffs. He said his name was Noah, that he was a fisherman, that he had no home, no family, and no reason to be anywhere in particular. He said he knew how to fish and mend nets and cook meals from things normal people don't eat. He said that if they didn't take him in, he would sail away. Daniel looked at him and thought. Rumors about the ghost island, light beneath the cliffs. So they've been seen. So someone sailed close enough to notice the light from the ventilation shafts at night, or smoke, or the glint of a horn. He turned to Jisoo. She stood behind him and was thinking the same thing. Her eyes narrowed, her lips were pressed together. She said quietly, "If one has found it, others will too, according to the rumors." Daniel nodded. He turned to Noah and said, "Come on in." Noah turned out to be exactly who he said he was, a fisherman, a good one. He knew fish the way Meyer knew water and Ezra knew trees. In the first week, he doubled their catch. He wove nets from fibers he harvested himself from coastal plants. He set his traps in places Meyer hadn't even thought of. He prepared dishes from seaweed and shellfish that delighted Evie, and Jisoo said were edible. For Jisoo, that was a compliment. Daniel set aside a small room for him on the first level near the vestibule. Noah said a hammock and a hook for his bag would be enough. Daniel built him a niche anyway, with a shelf for tackle. A person deserves a place of their own, even if they don't ask for it. 8 people, 22 months, almost 2 years. The complex had 4 levels, and Daniel began the 5th, the deepest, the most important. He returned to the ancient tunnel, alone, at night, when everyone was asleep. He dismantled the masonry he'd built himself 5 months earlier. He went in, with a torch and a rope. He walked down the smooth corridor, past the symbols on the walls, past the dark metal. He reached a large chamber. The veins still glowed with warmth as he approached. He didn't touch it. He went further. Into one of the side corridors he hadn't explored the first time. The corridor went down, steeply. Then it leveled out, leading to another chamber, smaller than the first. And in this chamber, he found something that took his breath away. A wall. The entire wall, from floor to ceiling, covered in symbols. Not individual signs, a continuous pattern, lines intertwined and branched out, forming a design he couldn't read but could see. And in the center of this design, a diagram. Straight lines, angles, intersections. He looked at it and felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. Because this diagram, this drawing on the wall beneath a layer of soot and mineral deposits, resembled what he had drawn in the sand on his first day. A diagram of a tunnel. His tunnel. Not an exact copy, but the principle. The main passage with branches, ventilation shafts, a slope for drainage. Someone, sometime, a very long time ago. He drew on the wall what he had drawn in the sand, the same solutions, the same approach, the same lines of force. A coincidence or not? He stood before the wall and didn't move. The torch crackled, shadows trembled on the symbols. Perhaps he had been summoned here. Perhaps this island was waiting for someone who could read stone. Perhaps the collapse in Seattle was no accident. Perhaps it was a door. That thought should have frightened him. Instead, it calmed him. Because if he had been summoned, it meant he was where he belonged. He went back upstairs. He sealed off the tunnel. And the next morning, at the team meeting, he said they needed to talk. All 7 of them sat at the stone table in the kitchen. He said there was something under the island, that he'd found it 5 months ago and kept quiet, that now it was time to tell them. And he told them about the tunnel, about the smooth walls, about the symbols, about the metal that senses life, about the diagram on the wall. He spoke evenly, without drama, as if at a meeting. When he finished, it was quiet. Ezra sat motionless. Kathleen held her mug with both hands and didn't drink. Meyer looked at Daniel without taking her eyes off him. Jisoo crossed her arms over her chest. Evie was writing something on a scrap of leather. Hannah sat with her eyes closed. Noah shifted his gaze from one to the other. Hannah was the first to speak. She opened her eyes and said she could feel it. For a long time. From the first day on the island. Something in the rock. Something alive. Not like a beast, like a breath. She said that in the temple where she grew up, the senior nuns spoke of the breath of the depths, of places in the world where the earth breathes. She used to think they were fairy tales. Now she thinks they aren't. Mire said she felt it too, that for the past month she'd been seeing the currents differently, more clearly, as if someone had sharpened her vision underwater. She'd chalked it up to habit. Now she wasn't sure. Jisoo was silent. Then she said one thing. If the ancient tunnel is real, and if the metal really reacts to life, then the island is worth more than all the ships of Havenrich and Sonhua combined. And that means they'll come for it. Not pirates, not traders, nations. Ezra said he didn't care about nations, that only one thing mattered to him, this home, these people, and if anyone tried to take it, he'd grab an axe. Kathleen quietly said she remembered a conversation between two senators. One of them had mentioned something about ancient mines on the island. She didn't understand it then. Now she does. The Senate knew. Brant knew. Daniel nodded. He'd been thinking about that too. He hadn't been sent here just to die. He'd been sent to search, unwittingly. His sentence wasn't execution. It was a mission, and he'd carried it out. Silence. A long one. Then Daniel said they couldn't hide it forever, that sooner or later the world would find out, and when it did, it would come. But they could prepare. They could make sure the island couldn't be taken, not by an army, not by a fleet. Engineering. He looked at the 7 faces and said, the 5th level, around the tunnels, the most secure, the deepest. That will be the center, the heart. Everything they built above it would be a shield. Jisoo nodded first, then Ezra, then the rest. They began building the next day. The 5th level was different, not like the upper ones. Here, Daniel built with a caution he had never exercised anywhere before. He checked every blow to the stone first. He listened. Would it disturb the tunnel? Would it damage the smooth walls? Would it hit a vein? He worked as if building around a sleeping person. Don't wake them. Don't disturb them. Just be there. He connected the 5th level to the 4th with a staircase, to the 3rd with an emergency passage, with a single corridor to the tunnel, narrow, with 3 doors, stone, heavy. It took one person to close them. It took a week to open them from the outside. By the 24th month, the underground city was finished. 5 levels: residential, work, storage, utility, central. 8 rooms: a smithy, a workshop, a kitchen, a laboratory, a storage room, 3 observation posts, a harbor grotto, an aqueduct, 6 defensive nodes, 6 months' worth of supplies, 8 people, 2 years. He stood in the square on the 5th level, an open shaft with natural light from above. A sunbeam fell down through 5 levels and fell as a spot on the stone floor. All around, warm yellow windows carved from the rock glowed. Oil lamps, stone niches, soft light. He heard sounds. The thud of Ezra's hammer from above, the splash of water from the grotto where Meyer was working on the boat. Hana's quiet voice from the lab. Evie's laughter from somewhere in the kitchen. Jisoo's footsteps on the stairs. Daniel stood in the beam of light and listened to his city. And he realized that the most important part was still ahead, because rumors spread. And those who sent him here to die would sooner or later find out that he was alive. The 8th member to join the community was Noah, a fisherman who had come on rumors of a ghost island. Daniel returned to the ancient tunnel and discovered a wall with symbols and a diagram similar to his own sketch of the tunnel. He told the community about the discovery. Hana and Meyer confirmed that they felt the influence of the breath of the depths. Kathleen remembered that the Senate knew about the ancient mines. The community built a 5th level around the tunnel. By the 2nd year, the underground city was fully completed and ready for defense. The corvette arrived in the 28th month. Jisoo was the first to see it. She was on duty at the eastern observation post when a silhouette appeared on the horizon. A 2-masted ship, with square sails, a warship. She watched it for 30 seconds. Then she pulled the rope. The stones clattered. The signal went out across the entire system. 2 minutes later, Daniel was standing next to her. The ship was coming from the west, slowly, carefully. It wasn't wandering like that first sailboat a year ago. It was moving confidently, as if it knew where it was going. Daniel looked at Jisoo. She said the ship was on a course that skirted the reef zone from the south. Not through it, around it. Someone knows the passage, or thinks they do. Daniel asked how long it would take. She said that with this wind and this course, the ship would be off the southern shore in 4 hours, unless it turned around. Daniel nodded. 4 hours. Enough time. He went below and gathered everyone. The briefing took 10 minutes. Jisoo was in charge. Her voice was steady, clear, military. She assigned positions. Noah to the western lookout. Monitor the approach. Count the people on deck. Meyer to the main deck. Prepare the boat in case of evacuation. Check the passage through the reefs. Ezra to the first level. Seal all external entrances. Camouflage the vestibule. Remove any traces from the surface. Kathleen and Evie to the storeroom. Distribute supplies to emergency points. Part of the supply to the spare cave on the western cliff. Hannah to the lab. Assemble a medical kit, bandages, herbal painkillers, hemostatic. Daniel to the third level. To the defensive nodes. Check every mechanism, every valve, every false entrance, every support. Everyone dispersed. No questions, no arguments. They had been preparing for this for a year and a half. They knew their positions. Daniel walked through the complex from top to bottom. First node. The false entrance on the southern bank. The path leading to it is well trodden. Inside, a sawed-off ledge on a tension cable. Pull the hidden rope and 200 kilograms of rock will crash down. Checked the rope. The tension was right. The rock was in place. The second false entrance on the western cliff. The third on the northern slope. Both were ready. The coastal passage. The tank was full, 300 liters. The main valve worked. The emergency valve worked. Jisoo had insisted on the second one. She did the right thing. He walked over to the main vestibule. Ezra had already finished the camouflage. From the outside, the entrance looked like an ordinary crevice in the rock. The stones were arranged so that even if you knew where to look, it would take 10 minutes to realize it was a passage. Ezra stood nearby, checking the last stone. Daniel nodded at him. Ezra nodded back. No words. 2 years together. No words needed. The corvette approached the southern shore in 3.5 hours, faster than Jisoo had calculated. The wind had picked up. Daniel watched from the camouflaged crevice in the rocks. The ship dropped anchor 200 meters from the shore, beyond the line of reefs. The draft wouldn't allow it to get any closer. Movement on deck. He counted the people. 20, 30, more. Military, in uniforms, blue with silver. Havenrich. He knew that uniform. He'd seen it on the men who'd brought him here 2 years ago. Then a rowboat pulled away from the ship. 8 oarsmen, a man at the bow, in a different uniform, not like the rest, richer. The rowboat headed toward the shore, slowly, weaving between the rocks. Someone at the bow was pointing. The channel. They knew the channel. The boat ran aground in the sand. The men jumped out, 8 soldiers, and a 9th, tall, graying, with a straight back. He stood on the black sand and looked around, calmly, without haste, like a master surveying his domain. Daniel looked at him and recognized him. Not the face. He'd seen the face once at the tribunal and remembered it poorly. The manner, the bearing, the confidence of a man accustomed to the world being arranged exactly as he decided. Marcus Brandt, senator, the one who signed his sentence, the one who sent him here. He had come in person. That meant one thing, that what lay beneath the island was more important than Daniel had thought. Brandt sent 4 soldiers up the slope, reconnaissance. They moved in single file, slowly, examining every rock. Professionals, not sailors playing at being infantry, the real deal. Daniel stepped back from the crevice and went down, to Jisoo. She was already in the command center on the 3rd level, a small room with 3 passageways. From here, you could reach any level in 2 minutes. On the stone table lay her map of the island, with red markings, enemy positions, patrol routes, blockade points. She looked at him. He said one word, Brandt. She nodded, asked how many people. He said there were 9 on shore, at least 20 more on the ship. She was silent. Then she said that 9 on shore was manageable. 20 on the ship are the reserve. We need the first group's landing to go so badly that the reserve won't want to come out. Daniel said that this was exactly what they'd been planning for a year. The 4 scouts found a path to the southern false entrance 2 hours later. Jisoo watched them through a viewing slit in the slope. They walked along the path with confidence, just as she had planned. The well-trodden path led straight to a dark gap in the rock. 2 went inside, 2 stayed outside. Jisoo waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The ones inside went deeper. She pulled the rope. A quiet click. Then a crash. 200 kilograms of rock came crashing down the passage behind the 2 of them. Dust shot out of the entrance like a gunshot. The 2 outside jumped back. They screamed. They ran back toward the shore. The 2 inside were alive. Jisoo had timed the collapse so it wouldn't kill them, just block them in. The rocks had blocked the passage. Those 2 were trapped. No light, no way out. Until morning, at least. -2. The remaining 2 ran to the shore and reported to Brant. Daniel heard this from Noah over the signal system. A series of knocks. Short, long, short. The enemy is retreating to the shore. Brant listened to the soldiers. Then he sent 4 more, with ropes and crowbars, to pull out their comrades. This group found the southern entrance and began clearing the debris. They fumbled around for 3 hours, pulled out 2, beaten, covered in dust, but alive. Brant stood on the shore and looked at the island. Daniel saw his face through the slit. Not anger, interest. Brant wasn't a fool. He realized the trap had been engineered, that it wasn't a landslide, it was a defense. And that meant there was someone on the island who knew how to build. Someone who was alive. In the 28th month, Havenrick's corvette approached the island. Senator Marcus Brant landed on the shore with a detachment of soldiers. Jisoo activated the defense plan. The first group of scouts fell into the trap of the false entrance. 2 were blocked by the landslide. Brant realized that the island was inhabited and defended. The community, on full alert, awaits the enemy's next move. Brant did not launch an assault, not on the first day. He returned to the corvette. Daniel watched as the boat pulled away from the shore. The soldiers rowed quickly. Lights came on the corvette's deck. A meeting, Brant thought. This was worse than if he'd charged head-on. A fool is predictable. A smart man is dangerous. The night passed in anticipation. No one slept. Jisoo sat in the command center and sketched out options. If he lands a force from the south, if he goes around and tries from the east, if he sends a boat through the reefs to the northern shore. She had an answer for every option. Not perfect. 8 men against 30 is never perfect, but enough to make every option costly. At dawn on the second day, Brant did what no one expected. He sent a boat with a white flag. 1 man, unarmed, an officer. He stepped onto the southern shore and shouted toward the cliffs. Senator Marcus Brant, on behalf of the Havenrich Senate, requests negotiations with the island's inhabitants. He guarantees the negotiators' safety. Silence. The officer stood on the sand and waited. A minute, 5, 10. Then he turned to leave. And at that moment, Daniel emerged from behind the rock, alone, unarmed, in work clothes, with stone dust on his hands and face. The officer stared at him. Daniel said, "Tell the senator that there will be negotiations, here, on the shore. He is alone. I am alone. In an hour." The officer nodded and walked back to the boat. Jisoo was furious. Quietly. Cold. She said going out alone was suicide, that Brant could grab him and take him away, that a white flag meant nothing to a politician. Daniel said he knew, but that Brant needed him alive, for now. Brant hadn't come to kill. Brant had come to take. The tunnel. Metal. The island's secret. And for that, he needs Daniel, at least for now. Jisoo clenched her teeth and said she'd be at the position with the rocks. If anything went wrong, she'd bring down the ledge above the shore. Daniel nodded. He went upstairs. Brant arrived on time, alone, just as promised. Tall, graying, a tired face, deep wrinkles around his mouth, gray eyes, attentive. He stood on the black sand and looked at Daniel as if he were a problem to be solved. Not with hatred, with interest. They stood 10 paces apart and were silent. Then Brant spoke first. He said he was glad to see Daniel alive. Daniel replied that he doubted his joy. Brant smiled slightly. He said it was for nothing, that a living Daniel was more useful to him than a dead one. Always had been. Daniel asked why he was here. Brant said it was because of what was under the island. Straight up. No beating around the bush. Daniel appreciated the honesty, or the appearance of it. He asked what Brant knew about what was under the island. Brant said he knew enough, that the Senate had found records, old ones, from archives that had been sealed 200 years ago. Records about ancient mines beneath the Calmo reefs, about a metal that reacts to living things, about a power that could be harnessed. He said that the Northern Expedition 2 years ago wasn't a trade mission, it was a search mission. The fleet went to find an ancient tunnel, and found it. Reefs, ships, death. The expedition failed not because of the engineer in charge of fortifications. It failed because the Senate sent a military fleet where they should have sent a single man with a hammer. Daniel listened and understood. Everything fell into place. The verdict? Exile. This very island, not by chance. The chosen one. He wasn't sent here to die. He was sent here to search, alone, with nothing, because the fleet didn't make it through the reefs. But one man did. Or, rather, they smuggled him in and dumped him, and waited. They waited 2 years. They watched the island. They waited for a signal, a light beneath the cliffs, smoke from the ventilation shafts. He found it. He did exactly what was expected of him. He built, he dug, he reached the tunnel. And Brant arrived for the results. Daniel asked what would happen if he refused. Brant paused. Then he said he had 30 men and a corvette with 4 cannons, that he didn't want an assault, that an assault would cost lives, that lives were precious, but that if he had to, he would carry out the assault. And then Daniel would not only do the island, he would lose the men he had brought here. Brant knew there was more than one man on the island. The trap had shown that. Daniel was silent. The wind ruffled his hair. The sea behind Brant glistened in the low sun. He thought, quickly, like an engineer. He broke the problem down into components, materials, constraints, failure points. Then he spoke. Senator, you gave me a plot of land 2 years ago. I'd like to offer you a tour. One day, just you and me. No soldiers, no weapons. I'll show you what I've built. And after that, you can decide if you want to storm it.